Welcome to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. Build Your Best Business focuses on the entrepreneurial journey. What does it take to successfully start, manage, grow, and eventually exit a business? I'm sitting today with Amy Balog. She is the founder and principal of ConnextionPoint and also a kind of a longtime friend. So tell me a little bit about ConnextionPoint before we get into your background.
Okay, well, ConnextionPoint is about building leaders at its most essential core. So organizations that bring me in are actually getting their folks ready for high-end, very high responsibilities, complex positions, enterprise, big jobs. And they have me come in and help them, prepare and get ready for it and really invest in.
Just don't throw somebody into that.
Yeah, right. We're not going to go into the deep end of the pool, but yeah, it is a wonderful thing. And in the organizations I work with, see talent as a strategic asset. They understand the impact that you make when you really bring people along in the organization. And so that's a big part of what I do. I also do a lot of work with teams and helping them learn how to truly be a team.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about that is you always, this happens all the time, or at least seems to happen all the time in the sales role. Mm-hmm. So you have a really great salesperson, and then you take them and make them the sales manager. Right? They're the VP of sales now. And just because I was great at sales does not mean I'll be really great at running a team or any. That's the one. That place seems to be the one that happens all the time, where they take that great performer and they move them into this kind of role, and they don't give them a lot of background into how to do it.
Yeah, there's a huge set of paradigm shifts. One is I did my job great in whatever it was. I was a great salesperson. Then there's a paradigm shift of now it's about managing and leading people, and that's psychologically as large as becoming a parent.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
And then even from there is what does it truly mean to actually not just manage, but lead and create an environment for all these different kinds of people and teams to thrive together. And that's yet another paradigm shift. And the things that you do to evolve it's personal, deep work.
Yeah. And what can happen, and the reason I use that sales position in particular is in the hundreds of companies I've worked with, it's the one that seems to always be the biggest potential for failure, right? Like you take the person who was a really great salesperson, they were on the road, she's making tons of sales, really good at it. And it's like, okay, now you're going to manage a team. And they feel like a failure after that because they get in, they may not be great at team dynamics because they're a lone wolf, and then there's this detail work they have to do and all this other. And it just becomes, it's one of the roles I see most likely to fail. Right, when somebody says, oh, we're going to take our best salesperson and make them manage the team. So when you talk about managing versus leading, so many people listening may be like, I don't understand how those are different. So what's the difference in your mind between the two?
Well, managing is, you're really operationalizing roles and responsibilities. And I think, let me back up and say this. I think when people are in positions, where they have reports and everything else, I think you need to be a good manager and a good leader. It's not like one versus the other.
Yeah, right.
There's not a badness to management. Management's actually very good. It's operationally understanding how do people need to be organized? How do they need to understand each other's roles? How do we keep them accountable? How do they know what the plan is? And it's just all the logistics of the environment, people getting work done, good work done, focused work done. Leadership is really bringing the real energy into the environment and truly reaching people where they're at, speaking to their talent, engaging them in the why of why this all matters, why they matter, pushing them, but through inspiration and not just, you've got to get this job done. It's here's what the environment is, here's where we're going, here's how we're invested in each other. It's also holding up the value system that should live and give meaning to the workplace. I mean, there's a lot of leadership. And the leadership is where, you need emotional intelligence all the way through. But on the leadership side, you work with a lot of high emotional intelligence. So you're in meetings and you're intentional about what kind of meeting you want this to be.
Right.
Where do you want people, not just the managing part of the meeting is what agenda do we have and what are we getting done? The leading part is where do I really want everybody to be at the end of this?
Well, and that's a delicate balance.
It is.
You're working with two sides of your brain.
Right.
Right. The one that's like, got to get stuff done.
I know.
Don't ask me questions because you just got to get it done. And the other side is, oh, you want to know why,
This
right?
is
I got
why
to
it's an
inspire
art.
you. Yeah, right.
That's why people like me enjoy what I do because, when you look at anybody who creates any kind of leadership model, I just looked at one yesterday. Companies come up with visual models for leadership, and there's like 1,000 things in there because it really does involve a lot. I mean,
Right.
it's a huge undertaking to really manage and lead well.
So is that something that you feel, I'm going to ask you the nurture-nature question.
Mm-hmm.
Cultivated? Is a leader cultivated or is it a leader born?
Oh, okay. That's a big question. So there's lots of schools of thought. It's both. And so some of us are born with, easier way to get to emotional intelligence and leadership. We were born maybe with a higher empathy, a little, we have some of our natural characteristics, in our brain that's just our personality. And, some of us are more excited about working with people than others and that kinds of thing. So there's that.
So many of the companies I walk into, the business owner says, my next business will have no employees.
That's right.
I'm like, don't think that's going to be a business.
Yeah, right.
So we need to start there.
Exactly. Right. So, but then there is the nurture part, right? And so one of the instruments that I work with is Herman Brain Dominance. I love the instrument.
It's called what again?
Herman Brain Dominance. So it's about styles of thinking, and very cool. And they talk about the fact that as we are raised, the social interactions you have from a very young age, all the way up through your preteen years or whatever, build patterns in your brain, and we learn how we interact with people. Teaches us our coping mechanisms, our social norms, and everything else. So we have neuroplasticity in our brains, which is neuroplasticity if you were to learn a new foreign language, you'd be building new connections in your brain physically. New synapses and neurons would be connecting in your brain. That's neuroplasticity. So we can learn. So that's why I believe, and I've seen it in my last 10 years, that when I work with leaders, they can evolve when they get highly aware of what they want to do and start putting intention behind it. So if a leader wants to become more of a facilitative leader and change dynamics in meetings, that means they have to bring out something different in themselves. If they really understand what that is and can focus on it and really get there, they can do it. And so it's, there is a lot we can do to evolve our leadership. And I think most people underestimate how much we can do. Okay, so driven then by desire. Is that what you're saying? The desire to make a change. Yeah, well, if you say, like, I'm really bad with people, if that's how you start, then you don't potentially have the desire to make the change and become better. If people are in situations where they recognize that they can't get to an outcome the way they've always tried to get there. Got it. They just can't get to the outcome. So the definition of insanity. It's like, I can't get there. Yeah. And I know that there's something I have to do differently. And that's a recognition. Sometimes it's, I don't know what it is. Right. I don't know what it is. I've already talked to them about it. I've already done all this. You'll see even senior leaders get very frustrated. It's like this organization just won't take action and get things done unless I'm involved. Yeah. And so and these patterns keep going on. It's like, actually, you may need to change the entire dynamic. Right. But that means that you have to do something differently. And if they're in enough pain, so pain's always pain is part of it. Yeah, definitely. Event. There's some people that just are always altruistically, want to grow themselves, and that's cool and that's great, and they're wonderful to work with, and that's good. But a lot of what drives us sometimes is just we're just cutting through our life and slamming through our days, and responsibilities are piling up and work's piling up, and then we realize, oh my gosh, I got to shift course because what I'm doing isn't sustainable, or it's just not working for the environment here anymore. And
Right.
I got to do something different.
And so how do you start then? So if you've got a leader that you're going to work with, or someone who's moving into a leadership role, where do you start? Like, what's the first thing? Like, what do you do with them?
Yeah, it's them taking a strong inventory of their own narratives themselves, and everything that they believe and say about themselves, the language they use. I think part of it is understanding what it is that you bring and how you bring it, and that's a big part of it. So we get, the dreaded word feedback. We get that dreaded word, but you have to do it in a really objective and compassionate way, and with people that can actually speak really well into the leader in the situation and help them see, and just get that all together. I usually use a combination of some instruments, but I don't think instruments can fully prescribe somebody. So it's the combination of their narratives, their whole history, their story, everything, and really get a full picture of themselves. And then you can make really powerful decisions about what they need to regulate to change different scenarios and dynamics. And that's why coaching, I think, is so powerful, because it's hard to do just for yourself.
Well, and I think that's an important point, that a kind of interpretive piece, because there are a lot of these tools and systems you can follow and things like that. And you need someone, even if you read it and you're like, oh yeah, I identify with that, you still need someone to help you then figure out what you're going to do with it.
Exactly.
Right? And what it means, like what parts of it you should ignore and what parts you should really pay attention to, and having that third party. And that's where I see some mistakes made, where a leader or someone will go start either a new kind of system for running their business, or take an assessment, and then they think they've solved it. Right? Yeah.
And then sometimes, even if you change something about yourself, if you've been in one pattern of behavior for a long time with the people you work with, and you change something, they won't believe it. In other words, it takes time for them to experience what you're giving back in a different way. And that's
walking the talk, right?
Yeah, and it's really, but they have to see it over and over and over again, and they have to have experiences with you that are different enough times to say, okay, I see, how you're leading differently now, and I get it.
Yeah, and that's because people ask me what it takes to be successful as an entrepreneur, and I tell them it's patience. Because it's going to take longer than you expected. Consistency. So you do the same things, you show up, whatever. Focus. And focus for me is a little different word, meaning kind of, it doesn't mean you're focused on narrow, but you kind of know what your objective is. And the last one is awareness, like being aware of yourself and where you fit.
That's huge.
Yeah, and the one that I see entrepreneurs in general, and we talk a little bit when we come back about that, because there's a difference between being able to face sort of your deficiencies as a leader within a larger organization and being the leader of the organization, like how you solve for it. But consistency is the one that's the one they break a lot. And they think, if I'm consistent to 2 meetings, and it's like, no, you have to be consistent to every meeting.
Right, because you're setting the entire climate for this.
Yes, if it's okay for you, it's okay for me.
Right.
Yeah. We'll be back in just a second. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're talking today with Amy Balog. She is the founder and principal of ConnextionPoint. You're listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Tell us about Laddering Works.
So Laddering Works is a company that helps other businesses in one of 2 ways.
Okay.
So your company is either growing and you're not exactly sure how to keep up. So you need to scale operations, maybe raise some money, those kind of things.
So growing too fast.
Growing too fast. Growing too fast. You got kind of structural, you walk in every day, there's a fire. You've been doing it longer than 3 years or 1,000 days, and you still feel like you can't step away from the business and take a vacation. So we help companies on that side. So sort of operational support, looking at their financing, seeing if there's a way that we can help them, get to the next level. Or you're a company that's not doing any marketing at all. So you are maybe stalled. Your business has gotten to a certain level. You make a certain amount of money every year, but you've never gotten above that. And we come in and build marketing structure. So both of them are operational at the end of the day. It's about creating a process and a way to approach it that's strategic. It's that owners don't often know how to do both of those. So they're really good at sales, which means they may need operational structure because they're out signing more customers than they know what to do with. Or they've built a beautiful product that's the best kept secret. And so they need somebody to come in and help them market that product. And so that's the kind of businesses we look for. We come in as a stopgap, and we work with a company for somewhere around 12 to 18 months typically, solve those problems for them and leave them better than we found them. And we're back. You're listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw, joined today by Amy Balog. She's the founder and principal of ConnextionPoint. She works with leaders who need to know how to balance that important thing of being able to lead, but also managing and maybe a new thing for someone. Specifically new, like it happens in organizations. So like that's why you go to work for a large organization is you want to escalate up. You know, you're looking for that path. And so I see that. If you decide to step out and start your own thing, well, all of a sudden you've really become the leader, right? I mean, you're it. The buck stops there. So if you think about that, you know, within a large organization, it might be safer to admit some of the things you need to work on.
Right.
There's others around you. You know, you're part of a team. But the thing I run into a lot of with the business owners I work with is they're like, I can't tell anybody.
Yeah.
I'm really bad at this.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
They already know. They figured it out.
No
They're not
secrets.
so good at the details. They got it. But so talk to me about how
Isn't that the truth?
how you might approach that or give them permission to let their team know those things.
I had a client that I worked with that had grown. I think the time I went to work with him, they were about 200 folks, and he had a really beautiful run. He had 20, quickly was able to get up to 25 people. That plateaued for a while, and then they got, and the thing that was good and bad at the same time was the company was culture, and a lot of the way people thought and acted was based on his personality and who he was.
The company is your personality.
I mean, it was so that, right? And he had done enormous things to drive sales for the organization. He brought a lot of some of the key disciplines they had and how they were doing things. The challenge is he was getting to a place where, of course, it was way too much for him to be as deeply involved, and
everything to everybody.
Everything to everybody, and having to make these hard decisions, and having to have the courage for him to kind of fire himself from some of these unspoken roles that he had. And what he had to do to make really hard decisions to hire talent that was much stronger than him. In an awkward place in the company, do I give somebody some ownership of this company? How do I deal with that? And all the personal decisions that he had to make, and make decisions about what he really wanted to do with this business in the long term. How big did he want to get it, and what did he want to do? But regardless of those decisions, he was in a leadership catch-22 at that point, because all the good things he had done to get him to that point were no longer going to serve where they had to go.
And that was a hard thing to realize, right?
Yeah, it really, really is.
This has worked for me for years, and all of a sudden that's not going to work for you anymore.
Exactly. It wasn't working for the fact that they were starting to formalize real departments and have real people having to run specific things. And, so his beautiful ideas and a lot of his ways to inspire that worked to get them to that point actually started creating some confusion.
Right.
He needed to bring more of a facilitative leader into the fold from himself. He actually sort of needed to think a little bit more like a COO than a CEO. He needed to make different decisions. He had to also face, sometimes we get highly sentimental with our companies. It's our baby, and the people that grew it with us are also kind of our kids in a way. And so
family. This
is really tough, because then a situation where he needed to bring in like a real CFO, like real talent to, begin to build the company. And, he had the person that grew up doing the books and, those kinds of problems that entrepreneurs have to face. They have to sort of go through what we talked about, paradigm shifts before, It's a paradigm shift of moving from entrepreneur to being a true organizational leader.
Yeah.
Which is, again, a huge set of things,
Well, and it's being okay with awkwardness.
Yeah.
So there's this period of time that's very awkward.
Right.
You got to work through it, and you just admit it. Like, right now, this is kind of weird. We're trying to put the process in place. We've never done it before. I don't even know how to follow it myself.
Exactly.
Things aren't going to work.
Right.
And
that's a beautiful way to put it.
And healthy conflict.
Exactly.
Healthy conflict. Like, if we don't agree, we need to talk about it and figure out how do we make this the best. And things I see that people run into in teams and others is just even admitting that we're all working towards the same common goal.
Right.
Right. And you get in rooms and, it feels like a person's agenda, and it might be because they feel like it's the right way. But it's like we all have the same, like we all want to be this, we want this to be successful. Right. So let's figure that out.
Yeah, it's reminding people. Well, there's a couple things that you touched on there, because one is, when companies sort of, move entrepreneurially very quickly, everything's done by exception. There's no standard process.
Right.
So, and the exception sometimes is just escalating it up to the founder. Founder makes a decision. Everything gets, I always have this thing about funneling up. All that gets funneled up and then drops back down. Everybody goes off and does their work. But as you scale, you can't do that. You have to have decision capability and talent in the middle, in the organization driving areas, and then the founder shifts and becomes this environment facilitator to say, okay, here's why we're all doing it this way. And then just the pain of putting in process is crazy for everybody,
Well, and entrepreneurs have often left corporate America to avoid process, avoid meetings, because when I walk in, they're like, well, we have meetings where I work, but I'm like, you're going to have meetings.
Right.
Like, we're not going to get anything done. They don't have to be an hour. We don't have to, but we have to do something that's consistent and check in and accountability. And
it goes back to the fact that management and leadership both have to coexist.
Right.
It's just they have to do it they have to live in the right format for what you're really dealing with.
Yeah. So talk to me about, I'm going to give you I want to do a little self-psychology.
Uh-oh.
Okay. So I'm
not ready for this.
Well, no, it's a good thing. So I know one thing about myself is that I'm a perfectionist. I'm a recovering perfectionist. Isaac just said in my ear, no. I'm a recovering perfectionist, and not being perfect had tragic result.
Okay.
Right. So that's the thought process I have in my head.
That's a narrative.
If I don't do things perfectly, then there's bad circumstances, right?
Okay.
And so now I'm taking piano.
Okay.
Okay. And which is like learning another language.
Yeah.
And one of the things that my piano teacher tells me all the time, she's like, you need to relax. And I'm like, well, if I relax, then I'm going to miss a key, and then it's not going to be right. So if you run in, and I got to imagine things like that are things that run around in people's heads that get in their way of leadership and management. How do you tell someone to get around that? Like, are there exercises you take them through? Do you
get around perfection?
See a therapist?
Get around perfection? Is this a coaching session?
Well, it could be, but I'm just interested, like, when they identify. Like, I know that's a self-identification for me.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that it's like, I believe that not being perfect results in bad things. And so if you found that out about yourself, and it doesn't have to be that. I'm just looking for an example of, as you're working with someone who's moving into a leadership or management and they learn something, are you giving them, like, go paint an ugly painting, like go, play in the dirt? Like, what do you tell them to kind of get them around those? Because they have to get around it, or do they have to get around it, or do they just have to know it? Which one is it?
Both. Well, it's both, because part of it is certainly, okay, so you're saying to yourself, I'm a perfectionist, and there's the narrative, and then there's the outcome you want. So the decision that you're having to make is, if I play the piano, if I learn the music more holistically, and I don't tighten myself around getting every note right, and I go into the feeling of the song and let some notes not be perfect,
right?
Do I learn differently that way? Do I get to the piece more meaningfully? And it's like, do I get to so part of it is, when we're changing a behavior, first it's, I can call it out in succinct terms. Like, I know exactly what the behavior is. So one leader is working with is trusting his people to do bigger things without his hands in it, so what does that look like? Let's talk about let's talk about the exact situations you'd walk into where you're doing that and what that could feel like. And then allowing yourself very patiently and very self-compassionately to try things and allow the experience to unfold. That's the key, and not to freak out and go back to, and allow and just learn from it.
Yeah.
And learn from it, and this goes back to dialogue, getting people to give you feedback.
It's the number one reason I still go to lessons. I've been taking lessons now for like 5 or 6 years, and
oh my gosh!
And everybody's like, "Well, you can practice on your own," and I'm like, "Yeah, but she gives me the accountability."
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And I'm one of her only adult students, if not her only adult student.
Oh, did she have you go on a recital?
No, I've not done that. That is not happening. But we can talk about drinking red wine, and I can cuss, and I don't think any of her 5-year-olds are doing that.
So, yeah, that would be a recital.
She shouldn't be sharing that they are, but yeah, right.
A bottle up there at the table.
Right.
Piano. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's just, that bandwidth to say, I'm going to practice this. And it's just, it's all intentionality, Eric. It's like.
Well, I like the word self-compassion.
Yeah, it's
and we
huge.
don't have enough of that, right?
No, my gosh.
Yeah.
No, we're so hard on each other. We're hard on ourselves.
Right.
And we're hard on. And so that's what it takes you have to be okay with being a little messy.
So it sounds a lot like what you do is like almost therapy.
Yeah, well, I'm not psychoanalyzing people down to the teeth, right? But you think about when we have to come in and change an environment, it's literally, if you walk in a room stressed out, full of intensity, maybe worrisome, that will set the tone of everything that's going to happen in that room, as an example. So our personal behaviors drive so much of what's happening in organizations. That's why it does feel a little bit like it's therapy. In some ways it is, but it's really, what am I giving to this to take people in a new place?
Yeah, yeah. And so as you start to look at, like, how do you measure success?
Oh, well, that's a great question, because, you can sometimes in this work have the home run. Somebody sees dramatic change, good change in people, and they feel it in themselves, and they see change, and it's actually having results. Because one of the things I always say to my clients, if we've done great work, the conversations around you are going to be different. The conversations change.
Right.
But see, what has to happen is this kind of organic thing, which is, first, the client has to have new conversations with themselves, in their own head, and there's a lot of things, and that takes a while. And then sometimes, like I said before, people don't believe you when you're giving something different. They hold on to old talent narratives. So often what I do in my client engagements is I sit down and have meetings with the people around my client, and we have meetings together, and we actually talk about it directly, what's happening.
Yeah.
So that they can be supportive of the change, because I will be triggered. I see you. Let's say you're somebody that's always domineered in a meeting, and I'll see you in the hallway, and I'll think, oh, that's the guy that takes over. Right. And I stay with that narrative. So people have to have experiences over time, but if you enlist them in the process that you're going through, then it seems to really move a lot faster.
So you're giving them permission to...
Yeah.
I'm a big Toastmasters person, and I had tried to get several of my team members at one of my companies to participate. They wouldn't, so we turned some meetings into little Toastmaster meetings where they would use filler words or whatever, and we gave each other permission to do that, right?
Yes.
To kind of turn it into that, and that does make it different.
Right.
And I could see that, too, of knowing, what is it like, I don't know the stat, but it takes only so long to create an impression, but it takes so many more times.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, to change it once somebody believes that about you or knows it to be true. So
that's right.
Well, very interesting. We always have great conversations.
I know. I love hanging with you, Eric.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And you did. We didn't talk about this much, but you did what I was going to do. So you truly downsized.
Yes.
And I did not. So you're living in, what do you call it, the cabin in the sky?
No, the cottage in the sky.
The cottage in the sky.
It's a
yes, cottage. And you put up these pictures of sunset and all these kind of inspirational things. So those are very nice.
Yeah,
so very nice.
Yeah, we made a big move. But it's beautiful, and I got to tell you, that's a big thing that I think we all need to think about is simplifying our lives.
Yep.
So,
well, I talked to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and they still wanted to live in the same area and had a big house but couldn't find a smaller house. And so what they did is just follow the minimalistic principles. So they're still in the big house. They just got rid of a bunch of stuff.
I know.
got rid of a bunch of
That's
stuff. So.
that's a great that's a must.
Right, because it'll all start trailing back in Amazon boxes. But anyway, so we've been talking today with Amy Balog. She's the founder and principal of ConnextionPoint. If you missed any of our conversation, you can find it on iTunes and anywhere else that you can look for a podcast. And if you want to get in touch with Amy, we have that in our show notes. Until next time, what are you going to do to build your best business?